Boom. There we go. I think we're operational. We're going to give it a few moments. Say a bunch of random words in the chat if you're able to hear my voice. Hopefully, it's still 2025 for those of you guys trapped in physical bodies on the earth plane. I think we are unmuted, but I'm going to wait for somebody to tell me, because if you know how it goes around here, I'll be talking for like 15 minutes straight. There we go. I see a lot of gibberish. That's a very good sign, because we're gonna we're gonna be talking about a lot. We're gonna be speaking a lot of gibberish here today. No, that would be wild if it was, right? What if what if this entire live stream was being conducted by an AI? Which AI would it be? Would it be Chat GPT? Would it be Grok? Would it be one of the other AIs? What's another cool AI that's around? I only know the mainstream ones. Maybe there's an edgy AI that says a lot of cuss words, you know. But anyway, greetings everyone. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us at a little bit of a different time. It's been I'm pretty sure we had to delete our last live stream that we did on the show. We may have not done another one since. I'm pretty sure the last time I appeared live was over on the Typical Skeptic podcast, but sometimes I get those mixed up between like a live stream here and like a show. So I think it's been a while since we've done one of these. For those of you guys that don't know, the last time we deleted our episode was because I showed too many videos and YouTube sent me warnings about it, and I got paranoid, so I deleted it. But anyway, we're gonna today we're gonna be going on, or we're going to be beginning once again a very unique journey for some of you. For me, it was kind of the story of my life for a long period of time. But for those of you guys that don't know, I published a book last year on June 22nd of 2024 entitled "Remember Your Mission: What If You're Not Crazy? What if you're psychic?" And I'm gonna rip the veil off right now and tell everyone it was really, actually, don't tell anybody this if you're here, because there's only don't tell anybody this. It was actually just a really big self-therapy project that I had to go through to kind of like describe and talk about and kind of upload into the collective consciousness the experiences that I had that kind of turned me into the the being that I am today, in whatever form that may be, good or evil, right or wrong. These are the events and these are the things that kind of brought me into this timeline in which we're on right now. And then, along with it is a lot of other stuff about kind of some of the methods and some of the things that got me started. I called them the 4 gateways of intuitive activation. Not to say there's only four, not to say, it even has to be a step-by-step thing. It's really just a path of discovery that we go through. And so, the second half of our book, which we will eventually get to, is talking a bit more about that. And so the good news is, if you've hung out on this channel at all over the past few years, you've probably heard you've heard a lot of these stories already. But this is kind of like the official version of it, the official version that I chose to put into writing. And I think one of the possibly interesting opportunities that doing a live book reading gives us is it allows us to kind of stop and ask questions, and allows me to kind of talk deeper about certain things that have occurred. Because on the other hand, it was really just a process that I kind of blurted out over a period of a few months in 2024. It was like this great purging that needed to take place. People in the world of tarot would recognize that as somebody will get what I'm talking about here, a big Nine of Cups time. It was the Nine of Cups. For those of you guys that don't know, Nine of Cups is all about excess energy and the needing to purge or offload or give away, or whatever it is. And so it all came kind of pouring out of me in early 2024, and this is kind of the final result. It's a very haphazardly pieced together yet completely honest retelling of, honestly, once again, just how I got to where I am. And so anyway, we're gonna get started here in a moment, but let me know if you have any questions. Before we get rolling here, I'm gonna officially take off my glasses because I won't be able to see the page with with sunglasses on. So I want to be able to see your comments. But anyway, for those of you guys that want to join us over the coming weeks, because we're going to make this a regular thing. What you know, what is the saying? The old saying. I'm trying to. It's sometimes it's hard for here. Come hell or high water, whatever that means. We're going to be doing this until we get through it. So, and honestly, that's just as much for me as it is for anyone else that finds this. You know, throughout history, however long, these videos last on YouTube. I think one of the reasons why we're called to kind of do a reading on this is also because we're going to have another book coming up. A very, very different one. It's where we're doing a tarot book next. I say we, it sounds so cheesy, right? Me and I guess, get ready to cringe. Me and the host of Strange Spirits that continually guide me in this world. Our next project is a tarot book, and it feels like in order for me to kind of, begin to seed the fields for the creation of that cycle, I have to kind of drain out and completely release, the rest of this one. And so, anyway, it's good to see you guys. What's up, Joanna LeBlanc? She says the chat's getting kinky already. Whoa. Okay. All right. I'm totally okay with that. I have no problem. Oh yeah. So we asked a question earlier. Which AI which AI would we be? I was gonna name that one, but I forgot the name. Willow Roots Creation says Claude. I've heard of Claude. I don't really know Claude. The only one I ever used was Grok. Yeah, White Swan knows it. Definitely Grok. I've never used unhinged Grok either. You guys, I'm still this is gonna make it sound lame already. I'm very much still like in the AI virgin stage. I've never really, really, really interacted with them with any like depth. I've asked Grok some medical based questions and I've had it edit some like stuff that I was writing. And I'm gonna be real, the edit was just like, it just turned it into like some kind of a robot sales pitch. So I just used it to correct my spelling and moved on. And so I guess I'm missing out on an exciting on an exciting new opportunity for humankind to, whatever it is. But anyway, so Earth Grid Miss Rescue Mission says, I love, what was it? Oh, wrong one. No, Chat GPT's getting kinky. Okay. Yeah, probably. I have heard of that. I love DeepSeek. I see. I don't even know. I'm like, damn, what's DeepSeek? That sounds deep. I'm like, okay, cool. But anyway, we're not gonna get too far off the mark here. We're gonna begin the reading portion of this in just a moment. Let me know if you guys have a specific question before we get started. For the record, I'll say it a million times. I'm so not anti-AI. I really enjoy looking at bizarre, malformed works of AI art. I'll admit it. I love the cat at the doorstep, like doing all kinds of weird shit. I love that guy. Later on, it'll get weird and annoying. For right now, we're still in a honeymoon phase. But anyway, I was also notified via text message that there's two live streams. There's the vertical version. Somebody texted me and told me, so that's this is the same show. I don't know why StreamYard does a vertical kind of portrait version of this. On that one, I will probably be on the side of the screen. So I would encourage you to look at the portrait or the landscape version. In fact, I don't even know who that person is on the portrait mode. That's probably an AI. That's why you could only see half of my face. So I don't know. I don't know who that is. Maybe we should anyway. So this is the book. This is what we're gonna be doing today. This is it right here. You can get it. You can see the link on the screen. This is Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? And then we have some very somewhat, potentially triggering cover art. This was one of the first areas of mild controversy when I was getting ready to finish and put this book out, which I want to mention before we begin. I had a kind of an idea for how I wanted to do it, which is what you see there. And I feel like it was one of those times in life where you feel a need to conform to some sort of an idea or an image, or like, even a social group's version of what is acceptable when presenting one's body of work. And I noticed around the time that I was getting ready to publish the book, I reached out to some of the cool kids in the, disclosure scene, some of the, the cool podcast and disclosure people, very creative individuals, and nobody. They wouldn't touch it. They would not touch it. I couldn't pay anybody. I could not pay I for this is literally true. I could not pay anybody to do the cover of this book, nor could I find anyone at that time to edit it that I actually really trusted. So I was given a lot of help from, random other people in sort of reading it, but it stands as a largely unedited body of work. And when it comes to the image on the cover, that was exactly what I wanted. There's a deep symbolism within it that I think will make itself evident as we go through the process, which, for some people almost sounds like it's like a bizarre thing. It's like, why did you choose to put a blood spatter and a praying mantis on the cover of your book? You'll sort of pick it up as we go through as we go through the journey. In fact, I would say that is more me than any other, star seed alien UFO, depiction could have ever been. So, um, anyway, let us begin. You guys can get your copy over on Amazon at the link if you want to join us over the coming weeks. I'm going to kind of shrink down here a little bit, and we're going to begin literally at page 1. I don't see any big questions here, so we're going to get started. I'll probably stutter a lot in the beginning. For those of you guys that know me, you'll know I have a tendency to stutter when I read. After a while, it kind of evens itself out. John Kin says, I'm expecting characters to be voiced accordingly. You know what? That's not out of the realm of possibility. For real. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I just might. I just might do it. But anyway, I don't see any big questions here. I see a comment. What's up, Earth Grid? She says, I always felt so isolated and recently felt connected this last year with people and my ability to channel and talk to spirit. You know what? This is a very good time for it. I think that that's also largely kind of one of the messages of this book, is that we are living in the time in which every ensouled human being has access to, the unseen hidden realms. It's there. There are very few barriers that stand in place other than the physical to non-physical veil, and really our willingness to truly devote ourselves to begin to perceive things in a different way. That's why that's one of many reasons why I think this is one of the best times we could have ever chosen to be alive. But anyway, let us begin. I'll show you guys the first couple pages and then I'll just start reading. But so White Swan says, well, geez, I was on the other stream. Yeah, I don't know who that is. I have no idea. I've never done a portrait live stream before. It's probably one of those AIs that will copy you, and then they'll do like an assimilated version of you, but they can only get half of my face. So I rebuke you, other version of me. Anyway, let us begin. So this is Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? By myself. Yes, the 400-page self-therapy project that came out in June of 2024. And we do have a dedication. This is dedicated to a person whose identity will become more clear as we go throughout the book. But this is to Britain. Without you, most of this would have never happened. At least not like this. Definitely. You'll understand why that's important later for those of us that stay with us, or those of us that have read it will also understand. I chose to begin the book with a quote that just kind of hit me. And some people think it's cheesy. Other people think it's, cool. Other people think it's tired. Some people are like, yeah, that's old news. But it was something that I had heard at a previous stage of my journey, and it just sort of rung out to me. And when in the final days before I launched this book, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to put that in there. And that's the quote by Hunter S. Thompson from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where he says, there he goes, one of God's own prototypes, a high powered mutant of some kind never even considered for mass production, too weird to live and too rare to die. You know, for me, it was kind of a meme in the end. Ultimately, it was like a meme like statement, something that was meant to be very humorous. But on another level, I think for a lot of us within the community of people that have had anomalous experiences and have had to rebuild our life or fight through years of trauma, it very much is like we live this life as this bizarre kind of mutant in a world of other beings where we never really fit in. And so to me, it made absolute sense. You know what I mean? I think I was either blessed or somewhat cursed to not find too many other people that really fit the role or the version of me that I became later on. It was almost like I was somewhat of an anomaly in that sense. And I think most people that find this channel find that they're sort of an anomaly in their own life. And so um anyway, let us begin. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? If you have found this message, congratulations. It means you have already succeeded in overcoming some of the greatest barriers toward true psychic activation in your human journey. Many were hidden from sight and others seemed impossible to withstand, but the reality is you made it. If you hadn't, you wouldn't even be reading this right now, and the series of circumstances that led you to picking up this book would have played themselves out in what would have likely been a very different manner. It also means that I was able to overcome certain barriers in my own journey, specifically placed in my path to derail and obstruct the creation of this work. The circumstances and obstacles are far too many to list, and yet I believe it's my duty to pass on this information to those of you still looking for answers, guidance, steps, or some unseen hand to suddenly insert itself into your human path. I've written this book for all of the other versions of myself currently existing in the physical and non physical realms, but most importantly, for the other versions of myself currently inhabiting the earth plane in physical human bodies, those of us that are here right now, those of us that are alive, you know what I mean? It is my belief that if you have found this writing, there's a piece of you within it. And the eternal spirit that has been guiding you in this life needs you to know that you are more than who and what you've been forced to become in this strange realm. If you're anything like me, you've probably noticed that your entire life you have been painfully, undeniably different in some way from those around you. It's quite likely that you were never seen or acknowledged in the ways that you needed to be. You were the last one picked, the ones who never got noticed or maybe never even wanted to begin with. Chances are you've always been too much in some way. Too big, too small, too fat, too skinny, too weird, too intense, too quiet. You guys know what I'm talking about. You've been too something this entire life. That is to whom I am speaking, the misfits, the weirdos, the strange ones, the undesirables who were cast aside by the world for not fitting into the standard issue packaging of your fellow humans. The truth is, I've been you my entire life. I think most of us here have, right? Even at my best and most comfortable moments, I still knew I didn't really fit in here. I couldn't understand why I was so different from all the others. It wasn't for lack of trying, though. I gave all I could for years, but it took me until the age of 40 to realize there was a very different timeline awaiting me. A whole new stage of purpose, ability, and magic that I never saw coming until I was willing to give up everything I thought I knew about myself and begin to take on an entirely new path in this life. My name is Matthew Aaron Morney, and I am a professional psychic and energetic practitioner living in a human body here on Earth during one of the greatest times we could have ever chosen to be born. To tell you the truth, it's still a bit weird to hear myself say that, even after 7 years of doing this work full time. You'll hear me say that many times over the coming pages. Some of you guys will even get sick of hearing it, but it needs to be said. A lot of you guys that watch this channel have heard this as well. I never knew this was what I was going to be in this life. Honestly, I never had any idea. I never knew that all the things that made me so different and unpalatable to the rest of the world were actually abilities and psychic senses that had been buried underneath years of trauma, addiction, avoidance, and the dysfunction that comes with denying one's true nature. But what do I mean by professional psychic and energetic practitioner? Depending on who you turn to, what books you read, or the YouTube channels you follow, you might have a very different understanding of what those words entail. My occupation and path of service in this life is one that involves discerning the layers of non physical data and mystical information hidden under the surface of our world, what some call the realm of spirit. Entities, spirits, higher and lower dimensional beings, ETs, and more. Although those words can mean many different things, it is my purpose to help those who find me in learning how to connect with, understand, and work with the unseen hidden forces that are ever present in the human realm. On an even greater level, I also help people remove blockages and trapped energy within the body. I'd say nowadays that's actually the most common that's actually the most common role that we take. This can take many forms, things like entity attachment, astral parasites, even things like non-physical implants that can exist in the layers of our energetic anatomy. For some of you out there, those words are the stuff of fantasy or sci-fi movies, but I can assure you they're very real, and yet the greatest form of energy blockage we encounter is nearly always our own unhealed wounds that lie buried deep within the body. The reality is, I work with forces that many people on Earth still do not even believe to be real. I would say the majority of people that find this channel in some fashion or form probably are on a very same level. In fact, prior to beginning this path and having my own set of very bizarre experiences in this life, I didn't believe they were real either. Over the years, I've transformed the understandings, experiences, and things I've learned into a path of teaching others to do the very same work. For those who may be reading this right now, I believe there's a good chance that that very path is now being offered to you as well in some way, whether large or small. If that's you, you'll feel it in your bones in a way that defies all explanation. You will just know. And trust me, none of this is by mistake. At its heart, this book is about my journey of transformation in this life. It's also a bit of an instruction manual for those who have somehow been drawn to finding these words and are starting to believe that all those things that made you undesirable to the modern world might actually be some of your greatest strengths in this life. Over the following pages, you will find a very bizarre set of experiences that made me who I am today. I realize my journey may have been very different from yours. I've learned over the years that I'm an extreme case, and much of what you read here may not make sense given your own pre existing programs and belief systems. I simply ask that you take what fits and file the rest for future reference. If there's one thing I know now, it is that none of this happened to me by mistake. Every single thing is what I believe to be true, and the more I have embraced these strange occurrences, the more meaning and purpose I have found in this life. And so we'll pause there. That's the introduction chapter. Pause for any questions. And hopefully my audio is okay. I have bad microphone dynamics, guys, so you gotta let me know. And my nose is already running, so that's usually a good sign. We're gonna move on to our official first chapter in just a second here. Thank you, Earth Grid Rescue Mission. Totally, totally. That's honestly the intention. I think a lot of us share a lot of elements of this story, but anyway, let's keep going. Let me know if you guys have any specific questions. I'm going to pause at the end of each section for any questions or anything like that. Um, So far, we're doing pretty good. So the first chapter is about get ready. It's about 50 pages long. So we might get through most of it. We might get through half of it. We're going to find a natural stopping point. We're going to attempt to keep this under, an hour and a half. Just, hopefully the YouTube algorithm will smile upon me kindly and allow some new people to find this. But so we're going to go ahead and begin. Chapter 1. This is called Back When Everything Was Simpler and More Confused. I'll give somebody some special points if you understand that reference. Back when everything was simpler and more confused. Many of us will recall the major economic downturn in the US that occurred in 2008. And just like a lot of people I knew at the time, I had suddenly found myself unemployed and completely stagnant. I had really no ambition whatsoever. I was on at least 4 or 5, honestly more, I think more at times, different forms of antidepressants, mood stabilizers, SSRIs, Adderall, and especially even a long-term opiate replacement medication known as buprenorphine, or as it's more commonly known, Suboxone, which is truly one of the most addictive and soul-crushing pharmaceutical substances known to man. It was probably the safest and most docile version of myself yet. I was so medicated I had ballooned to around 230 pounds and spent most of my time lost in the world of video games, completely dissociated from every painful emotion and inner signal of truth that had been flooding my body for the majority of my life prior to getting sober. Although it's funny now because looking back on how medicated I was anything but sober. You know how it is. If you play by the rules of Western medicine, you'll just end up receiving the pharmaceutical version of everything you were caught up in before, but it's from a doctor now. So it's okay, right? By the time my unemployment ran out around 2010, President Obama had signed something called the Workforce Investment Act. And somehow I had been given the opportunity to go back to school, all for free on the government's dime. I remember sitting in some blown out adult education center in the National City area of San Diego, California, looking at this list of vocational programs being offered. And within a split second, my eyes were drawn to something way down on the bottom of the list: chemical dependency case manager. I had already fought through and successfully survived a soul level entity attachment, or what I believe to be a soul level entity attachment, that came in the form of extreme addiction to heroin, cocaine, and a host of other substances back in the late 1990s. That could be 3, 4 other books in itself. It's like a whole other timeline, which, we don't really go too much into this book other than just naming it and calling it out. But I had already come through a period of extreme addiction, and like a lot of us who have lived through such a chapter, it became natural to enter a path of service in some way. For those familiar with the 12-step model of addiction recovery, it was a stage of my life many people from that world refer to as the 12th step, a chapter of service wherein one reaches back to assist those still suffering with the same affliction. While I was victorious in shedding many aspects of my previous self that had led to what I often called the blank years, as somewhat of a tribute to the late author William S. Burroughs, I really had no allegiance to the mindset and the belief systems of traditional addiction recovery modalities. I still don't to this very day. I deeply resented them and their idea that once you are an addict, you always would be, forever haunted by some previous version of yourself until the day you die. I remember they called it a daily reprieve, and I was so sick of it. I felt trapped by the belief systems of people who had actually saved my life a few years prior to that. No matter what, according to their philosophy, I would always be broken in some way. I knew in my soul that it was absolutely untrue, but I had nowhere else to go but into the same business. Excuse me. So, with a few signatures and phone calls, I began studying at the University of San Diego Extension campus for about a year and a half. During that time, I started to be strangely drawn to all kinds of new things. In hindsight, it was what some may call a guide shift, a stage in which the members of one's spirit team, or whatever you want to call it — most people just use the term spirit guides — seem to change position. New ones come in and old ones step back. It is extremely common when we are about to experience big shifts in this life, and will often be marked by sudden urges to immerse oneself in previously unheard of new interests, subjects, and areas of life that seem to come out of nowhere. I think a lot of us here have noticed and experienced such things. You might have seen them in other people as well. For me, my understanding at the time was that it was almost as if those who had been helping me sort of change shift in a sense, and it was like, now we're moving into this chapter. And so, New energies were coming in. It often happens in some seemingly random way or by chance, but for many of us, it's anything but random. It is all by design. And when there's an opening for spirit in one's life, all kinds of new things will walk in the door. Each one will have its own vibe, frequency, or purpose in some form. The first of which was a self hypnosis and improvement program known as the Silva method, which is a fun research wormhole to go down in your own time. It really is for anyone that wants to look into the Silva method, both good and bad things. The version Silva method that's out today, this is not text from the book, this is my commentary. The version of the Silva method that's out today that's purchasable by most people is not the one that I had. Absolutely not. And I know that that one that I had is even different from the original versions of it, which were far, far different and much more hypnotic in ways that some would say was branching a little bit close to a version of mind control or reprogramming in a certain sense. And so it's something that has changed a lot over the years. But that was the first entry point for me. And I think learning to work with what we would call the powers of the mind. They're both a lot, and this is me going back to the reading. There are a lot of both good and very negative things that have been said about that program. And I remember reading that it was essentially, like we just said, a form of mind control one would program themselves with. Regardless of what it was, it had a profound effect on me. I began to study self hypnosis with an intense fervor. My entire life seemed to be overtaken by the need to finish this school program. And later on, I began to use this daily method of dropping my consciousness into what is commonly known as a theta state. For those who don't know, the simplest way to describe it is the stage just before sleep, but not full unconsciousness. A stage in which the mind is both present in the body, but also completely detached and in a much more receptive wavelength. I learned to venture into that state at any time of day with eyes open or closed. It was effortless. I can honestly say still to this very day, that sort of theta drop in process, I think, is one of the most useful tools that I use in learning to connect with people's energy. And I think for those that are learning psychic or intuitive development, learning to use the theta state or to sort of modulate the brainwave activity within the body will fundamentally change your ability to connect with non physical energy. But anyway, let me get back to it. I became obsessed with it, and shortly after practicing for only about a month, I began to deliberately manifest very simple things in my life, like parking spots or favorable treatment from instructors, or I would just say things to people. Honestly, I was fearless. I would just play with it. It was like I was also reading, I was doing some people will get a little weird about this. I was also working a lot with NLP and sort of using trigger words to elicit certain states and emotions within myself and other people. And I went all the way with it. I mean, literally all the way. And I had some amazing results before I ever even knew what I was doing. Um, and so I began to deliberately manifest very simple things in my life, like parking spots or favorable treatment from instructors in my classes, just by connecting internally, dropping into a theta state, and then having some kind of mental conversation with myself or someone else. For one of the first times in my life, something had really ignited within me, and it truly changed what I believed to be possible for myself. Shortly thereafter, I was led to discover the work of a conversational hypnotist, a man by the name of Igor Ledachowski, who you guys can find. He's still out there today. He's more of a pop psychology kind of pickup artist, hypnosis kind of person, but he fundamentally changed. I mean, such an effect on me. I don't think we always get to choose who influences us. I mean, clearly, right? We don't get to choose the ways in which we're influenced. And I think that I was blessed to be influenced by some very, very particular people in the beginning. But I was fascinated by his ability to draw people into a hyper focused trance state just by speaking a few simple words. I took two of his courses, which were oddly enough, like we just said, aimed at men who were trying to become pickup artists and salesmen. He essentially taught them to manipulate the desires and thought forms of people with an artful charisma that, despite being intended in somewhat of a parasitic fashion, had enthralled me to such a degree that it became the next great obsession in my life. In hindsight, it was a very surface level program teaching the art of extremely quick hypnotic induction and redirection by harnessing emotion, desire, and then subtle verbal commands to essentially trick someone into doing whatever you wanted them to do. I took an NLP course online a year or so later, and it felt oddly similar, but was delivered in a very different way. On paper, it seemed kind of insidious, but I was devoted to it, and in truth, hadn't even considered how it could be used for dangerous purposes because it was never my intention. And honestly, it wasn't, is what's crazy. And I remember a few people in my life around at the time were like, why are you doing that? That's so weird. Why are you trying to, influence things? Why are you? And for me, I was like, why not? There was never, I think maybe that I was blessed in some way that in the beginning I was so clueless and so new that I was like, whoa, this is amazing. It wasn't like, whoa, this is amazing. You're gonna follow my every command. And I think that's important to be mentioned because it was like there was no ulterior motive. It was like I was being led by something, and it was it's a bizarre and unique experience. So let's get back to it. I was devoted to it, and in truth, hadn't even considered how it could be used for dangerous purposes because it was never my intention. In fact, I still do not consider it to be anything but a system of rapid verbal hypnotic induction and suggestion. I mean, and this is me commenting, so, which is what the world does to you every single day. Open your phone, go on TV, listen to modern media. That's literally what they're doing to you. Why not do it to yourself? You know what I mean? Use it for a purpose. And so, well, I didn't know why I was there. I knew it was something I could do, and it was all I wanted to do. So fast forward to about 1 year later, and just as I finished that UCSD school program, I was mysteriously offered a job interview at one of the instructors I had met in a case management course. His name was Albert Graciano, and he was one of the angriest and most domineering men I have ever met in this life. I can honestly say that to be true. Probably one of the most toxic as well. I imagine he's passed on now. I say that with respect. He was one of the angriest and most domineering men I've ever met in this life. And I recall sitting in his class, and while I deeply despised his style of communication, I felt drawn to speaking with him internally in that very same theta state I had learned months prior. I remembered hating him, but also being desirous of something that he had. He seemed deeply connected, like one of those people who could make things happen by sheer force of will. And I think I both resented and admired that about him. I would sit there in his class and for some reason felt drawn to communicate with him internally. Keep in mind, I knew nothing of telepathy. And in truth, I don't think I would ever try to call it that. But knowing what I know now, that's exactly what it was. It felt like an internal conversation we would have. And for some reason, it was easy with him. Funny thing is, all I could feel from him was pain and anger, but it was easy somehow. It was like a naturalness to it. Right after the close of the program, I ended up in his office at a veterans treatment center in San Diego, California. I was missing one big requirement for employment there. This is important to know. A degree in psychology or some form of previous experience. I had never actually finished school despite attending on and off for several years. Literally everyone had some kind of advanced degree and multiple professional vocational certificates like the one I had just obtained. And the entire scene was so chock full of desperate job seekers. It was kind of the norm between 2008 and 2011 for those who may remember that era. At least it was in the US. For those of you guys that, recall that time period, there was, it was like nobody could get a job. It was, that sort of like recessionary, chunk of time that we all lived through, and, where there would be like 55 people all applying for the same job at the same time. And as a complete shot in the dark, I decided to check this out, everybody. I decided to Photoshop my own college diploma and just fake the whole thing. I really thought I had it going on, but when I got to the interview, I looked at all the pieces of paper and degrees on his wall and immediately noticed how mine looked utterly ridiculous. It was like I had copy pasted some kind of grainy JPEG file from Google onto a sized document template and signed a few fake names and just went for it. I remember sitting there knowing full well he would be able to see that I was fake, and as we got to talking, I could feel such annoyance coming from him toward me that without thinking it, I immediately dropped into a theta state and just straight up asked him to let me in. In fact, I just repeated it over and over inside my head. And I mean this sincerely. It was like a little kid pleading. I don't know why I wanted to work there at the time in my life. I knew I was supposed to work there, and I was in my mind, I was like, please let me in. Please let me in. I'm good. I can do this. Please let me in. It was like this childish pleading that I was doing, within my mind, within my heart. And within a few seconds, he closed the folder I had given him and just said, okay, thanks. We'll call you if it's a good fit. And that was it. Almost 2 months went by, and I had already decided to move on from it all when out of the blue one day I was suddenly called up, offered the job, and by a complete experiment of desperate thought transference, the next chapter of my life began. Without diving too far into it, I have to admit I hated working there. I absolutely did. I'm just being totally real. I'll tell you the real name of the place for everyone that's out there in this world. It's called Veterans Village of San Diego. It's a real, actual veterans treatment center that I worked at for 7 years, I think, six and a half, something like that. And I never enjoyed it. I did not. It was not a good place. you know so that is what it is. And so it was I was painfully out of place, and one of the very few people there who wasn't a military veteran or a current member of any branch of the military, which according to the culture embraced by that organization meant there was no way I could possibly understand the suffering or sacrifice of what these people were apparently going through. It was a losing battle for social acceptance from day one, but it gave me a few distinct opportunities that allowed me to experiment with what I was capable of. And I would say this was after about 4 years of working there. So it took some time for me to get to this point, but I began hypnotizing my clients, dropping into theta to try and convince them to do things like follow rules, take their meds, go to 12-step meetings. And even toward the end of my time there, in 2017, I had secretly started doing energy work and some type of extreme early stage energy clearing processes on the clients there. Even a few coworkers actually as well asked me to do it for them. I had trained people to ask for it by code word, actually, and had to be extremely careful in how I went about it because, I mean, ul- ultimately, I mean, I was completely outside of the scope of my area of treatment. I was branching very far out of what I was technically qualified to be doing. And it was all completely against the rules, of course, and, like I said, outside of my scope of treatment. And then one day in July of 2015, my life was changed forever. And we're gonna pause right there for a moment. We're gonna pause right there, and we're gonna look for some questions, because that begins a whole new area of the journey that we're gonna read through together. And so, anyway, let me know if you guys have questions. I'm going to scroll through really quick and then we're going to jump back into it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us, by the way. If you feel inclined to share this, if you feel inclined to share today's show, you will be of great aid to me. As we're always fighting against the algorithm. Maybe I should be fighting with the algorithm or alongside the algorithm instead of fighting the algorithm. But, it's, the never ending battle for YouTube relevancy. What's up, Kim Russell? Good to see you. Thank you. I am glad that we're doing it as well. It's like sort of fun. It gives me a chance to talk about some of it. Some parts later get a little personal. I'm going to tell you guys this is just the first chapter where we're setting groundwork and talking about boring third density early stage origin story things, you know what I mean? It gets so weird later on. But anyway, let me know if y'all have any questions. Willow Roots Creation says, Can someone counter your manifestations and intents? I think it depends on the nature of it. I think it depends on how affected we are by other people's energy. I think it depends on the forces at play. I think from a day-to-day, like, human to human perspective, like, there's really not a whole hell of a lot somebody can do to stop a person who, some would call, on some path of, like, divinely manifesting something that's due to them. Meaning if it's meant to come to you and it's yours and it's, and you're willing to, really, like, unify your desire and seize it. I don't think people can kind of, destroy that. But, then again, there's so many different conditions and ideas and opinions on, how that works in our world, that it's like maybe they can. Now that, since we're here today talking about ancient history, there was a period of time when I worked at this physical store in Los Angeles. We'll get to it in the book eventually. And there was people that there was like this one week where there was like a group of women, and I think they all knew each other. This is going to sound so weird to you guys. All three of them had this belief that somebody had stolen their powers and stolen something from them. And I was like, I don't think that no one's going to be able to take your abilities and your powers like that away from you. I think we can be hijacked, we can be led down, a negative path, we can be influenced, we could be, but it's not a thing that someone can come in and go, no, it's mine. You know what I mean? I might be wrong. Everyone thinks they know, right? But anyway, we're gonna get back to the reading here in a moment. Cat L says, "Was your original impulse to write a book, or did the idea spring forth from journaling?" That's a good question. Thank you for asking. I actually have been a journal person at a previous stage of my life. I had filled countless handwritten journals, and it was a lot more like a this will sound weird. It was like a running prayer that I was writing day after day after day for years. And so I don't know that it was so much that I was writing a book. It was that something needed to be kind of expressed through me. And I knew that part of the journey was to write a book. It's a thing that I've known for a while now, that was shown to me early on. But it kind of took its own form, I would say. I didn't really know the extent, or what, or the extent of, or what exactly it was that was going to be communicated through it. Which is why it is a bit of a, what we would call a meandering journey. But anyway, let's keep going. Quick study, say non-veteran trying to cancel veterans. You must know nothing about modern addiction treatment if you think that only veterans can counsel veterans. Have fun with that. Oh God, that's literally that ignorant mindset that I was talking about earlier from the literal place that I worked. It's like this weird mental block that some people have. I encountered that at another stage when one of the first places I worked at was I actually worked at a Salvation Army for like a while, and you will get a different version of that so-called "you can't understand me" mindset. You're gonna get that in any treatment environment. Any sort of treatment community is going to hold itself to what we call terminal uniqueness, whether it be in 12-step, traditional 12-step treatment, whether it be in the veteran community, whether it be in the homeless community. That was another one. I worked at another treatment center for a while that was all just prison people that had just gotten out of prison. And every single community has this, like, if you didn't do my journey, you can't understand it. Therefore, you're not good. And it's just one of those, like, low level kind of like blockages that people will kind of hold themselves in a state of suffering and, once again, terminal uniqueness. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's one of those things, like, you'll even see it in the starseed SSP like communities, where guys are like, you don't know what it was like, I was on Mars, and it's like, you can't understand my experience, therefore there's nothing you can do for me. And that It's just, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like people who have actually worked in it and spent time there and like operate within that realm, they'll be like, yeah, you know, and so anyway, oh god, we will get back to it. We're gonna get back to missing time. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a double stream going on. It certainly is. There's another version of me. It's an AI copy. Don't watch that other stream. Cancel it. Let's keep going. This is actually where everything changes. And so thanks for hanging out with this, you guys. Let me know if you have any other questions. We will certainly get to them in a few pages here. And so let us continue. And then one day in July of 2015, my life was changed forever. And that's kind of a big statement, right? It's kind of like one of those mic drop statements, you know. Some people wield that statement every day. They fling it around. Others, you know, use it very carefully. There's really no other way to describe it. There's really no other way. And so for those of you guys with a little bit of an open third eye, you'll get a visual replay of this in your own mind's eye if you choose. But there was a yearly homeless outreach fair they would put on called Stand Down, where homeless veterans from all over the world would show up and camp out on this football field next to San Diego City College for days to get services, housing, medical care, etc. I had become utterly checked out from everything there, but I was forced, like everyone else, to show up and take part. It was around the second week of July, and at that time, the weather was so painfully hot and dry, as it often is in the San Diego summer, that the only thing I could possibly do was look for some place to stay out of the sun or maybe just hide so I didn't have to do any work. The environment was insufferably chaotic. I had become so open to energy that I was unknowingly absorbing the thoughts, feelings, and emotions from those all around me. I would get easily overwhelmed and go through intense fits of self punishing rage or extreme avoidance of everyone and everything. At that stage, I had become so toxic from the amount of medications that I was still taking the guise of sobriety that most of my days alternated back and forth between states of disassociation and then deliberate mental experimentation in a theta state just to keep myself sane. And that's literally true. That's really how it was for me. I was fat and I was sick and I was very inflamed and I was very angry. Imagine an angrier version of me, you know, a much angrier version than I am now, which is nothing compared, you know, to how it was. And it was a toxic existence. I would say one of the only things I was doing right at that stage of the journey was that I wasn't aiming it out at everyone else. I was like aiming it at myself, which, you know, comes with even more like issues, you know what I mean? But I wasn't like lashing out at the world at that stage. There was really no point. There was literally no point in it. It was the only thing I knew how to do at that time. But to be honest, there was never a point in which I would have called it psychic in any way. It was like a coping mechanism for me. I think around, you know, the early mid 2000s, the act of refocusing and reprogramming my mind toward more positive and constructive states of well-being was very much an obsession at the time, and it was a thing that I stayed focused on, and maybe that's one of the things that helped open the door. But I'll be real, I don't even know if I was really that good at it because you know what I mean? It was not an easy road. It was very much like a coping mechanism for me. I think it was a Saturday. To me, it felt like one of the hottest days of the year. I had no water. I was angry. All I could feel was the extra layer of around 30, 40 pounds. To be honest, you guys, it was more like 50. It was like 55 extra pounds that had grown over my body throughout the past several years. I wandered around the event just looking for a place to sit down or hide from all the dysfunctional chaos that was everywhere, not realizing its true source was coming from within me. I finally gave up and had resigned myself to going back and filling out assessment forms for potential clients. As I was walking through the crowded field, I noticed one tent, kind of on the side near the bathrooms. It was staffed by a group of grandmotherly looking old women, and they had lots of chairs and shade and nearly no one else sitting there. There was nobody there. As I walked past, I was kind of put off by the direct gaze of one of the women in that group, and she said to me, "Would you like an energy blessing?" My honest to God internal reaction to her offer was, "What the fuck?" And this is really true. This is literally, I remember this old woman looked at me. I was actually turning to my right. I was turning to my right. And this one was like, "Would you like an energy blessing?" Like very like determined, and I was like, "What the fuck? What?" You know? And but what came out of my mouth was something like, "Yeah, I guess so. Is it okay if I sit down?" Which was all I really wanted to do. Like, really, honestly, all I wanted to do is sit down and somehow get away from some kind of intensity I didn't understand. Looking back now, I thought it was everyone else. I thought it was the world, but it was me. So I sat down and she stood behind me and placed her fingertips gently on my head. I remember taking an uncommonly deep breath as I exhaled, I felt something stirring up at the top of my head. It was kind of like the breath I had exhaled somehow went out of the top of my head, and in all honesty, I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes, there's really no telling, but after a few moments, she finished and said something along the lines of, "There you go, have a nice day," and I wandered off, and that's literally what it was. I sat there, and you know what I mean? This lady put her hands on my head, and I felt the coolness of the breeze, and it was, just a very simple moment spent doing a thing that I had never done before, sitting in an area just because I wanted a little bit of relief from, what was ultimately my own madness and toxicity. It's funny because ever since that day, each and every time I have ever spoken of this moment, I still receive the same sensation at the top of my head that I walked away with during the initial encounter. I can honestly say that is absolutely true. However, I think at this stage of the journey, it's because I work with chakras on such a daily basis that it's like I've become very sensitive and noticing and feeling the movement of those things within the body. But I also think that, things that we've experienced, such as that, live, within the body itself on a number of levels. And it's like as you continue to go back over the experience, your body still feels it and it remembers it. And yeah, it felt like I had a hat on or some kind of opening had occurred, and I could feel my breath moving at the top of my head. To be more specific, it felt like wind, as if it were blowing into and out of me in some way that up until that point I had never imagined. I remember walking back to my assigned tent and seeing a long line of people waiting to fill out program intake forms. Without realizing, I walked right past them and went over to a fence at the edge of the field overlooking downtown San Diego. The field where the event took place was on somewhat of a hill that allowed for a shockingly wide view of the city. I just stood there feeling the wind coming out of the top of my head and looking out at everything around me. I felt very strange in a way that I really had no words for. I could see all the way out to the harbor, and as I looked up into the blindingly bright July sky, I was able to keep my eyes fully open, which was uncommon for me at that time in my life. Bright light literally hurt. I mean, for real though, it was like a physical pain. It's like literally a physical pain. And I believe it was in part due to all the medications I was taking. I had had lots of rashes, facial swelling, abdominal inflammation. I mean, it was very, very extreme. I cannot understate the extremity of toxicity that I was in. I was so utterly toxic. There were entire days in which I felt as if I couldn't even open my eyes indoors. And when I did, they would just water, like my eyes would just weep and just pour liquid out of them like all day, literally nonstop. And for those who don't know, that's a sign of lymphatic backup within the body. Sometimes lymphatic toxicity can be a sign of lots of other things. So it's not only that, it can also be a sign of liver toxicity. But I could not even look up in the sky. I could not look up in the normal daylight and keep my eyes open. My eyes would actually automatically close. It was like they would just shut and burn. As I looked up into the painfully bright blue sky, I saw for the first time in my life what appeared to be little sparks going off in the distance. Not stars, though, not aircraft. It was as if there were these tiny little sparks of light that kept going off around me. Some seemed to be right next to me, and others were what looked like miles off in the distance, but somehow I could see them just as clearly as the sparks that were going off right next to me. It made no sense, but I gave it little consideration. I felt incredibly strange, but not in distress. And after a short time, I returned to work in a pleasantly calm, dissociative state. By dissociative, let me tell you, I mean genuinely. So I would just like, I mean, really, I was really that guy. It was not cool. I even asked my coworkers if I seemed okay. I had told them it felt like I had an invisible hat on my head. And of course, that just led to shrugs and eye rolls. It really did. I went home a few hours later and did not return to that event, despite being assigned to be there all weekend. I just didn't go back. And somehow nobody ever noticed. This was when the unthinkable happened. There's really no other way to say it than this. Within 24 hours of that moment, everything about me started to change. I'm going to pause there for a moment and say that is the most gross understatement that could ever be said. I would say one of the first things, which I don't even mention in the book, is that my body would vibrate. It was like I would say in kind of like going back to that very day in which what was ultimately a crown chakra opening. I'll talk about that in the next couple pages, but it was like I could literally feel a vibration occurring in my body that went all the way through to my fingernails. And it was like something was like just constantly kind of like moving and vibrating and like, oh Lord, it was from the very start, something incredibly, incredibly strange was happening to me. And I really had no language. I really had no language to kind of articulate it at the time. Which, I'm saying this before we get back into the texture, which is really ultimately, why we find the title of the book as, maybe you're or what if you're not crazy, what if you're psychic? Because that was the origin point of it. From that very day forward, it was as if something changed within me. And my initial response to it, my first reaction was like, oh well, you're probably losing your mind. Wow, this is what psychosis is, I remember having that thought where I was like, this must be what it is. This is what I'm experiencing, right? Right. And so, you may ask yourself, what led you to think that that's what was happening? All you did is have some lady touch your head and you felt some wind in your body. There's really no other way to say it other than this. Within 24 hours of that moment, everything about me started to change. I woke up the very next morning and had a thought that would have been like suicide to me only the day before. I felt for the first time in my life that I didn't want to take my medication anymore. It sounds basic and dumb and lame to some people. You know what I mean? Like, oh, really? So you took yourself off your psych meds? You know what I mean? Because there's so many people will hear that. And the only thing I can say to that is yes, exactly. That's exactly what happened. It was something that would have been like suicide to me only the day before, but I felt for the first time in my life, honestly, that I was ready for it. I know that sounds ridiculous and trite to some people, but that is really where it started. I just didn't want to anymore, and of course, I had no idea why, but for the first time ever, I went for it. And I made one of those old school remorseful drug addict gestures of flushing everything down the toilet. A lot of us out there have done such a thing in this life, right? I know somebody else watching this has. You absolutely know what I'm talking about. It wasn't a big deal though. I had several months worth of all kinds of meds stashed around the house for emergencies in this classic old school drug addict fashion. The wind I had felt in my head the day before was still there, but it seemed to have spread down to my arms and my chest. And as I would breathe out, I would see these weird little sparks from the day before light up in the corners of my peripheral view. That's an important thing to mention right there. That was a very, very peculiar thing for me, and I would say that was one of the visual manifestations that really stuck with me at that stage. In the very early days of having this kundalini explosion in my body, it's like if I pushed my breath, like if you like like would push my breath or sort of like exert the body, I would literally see stars and like orbs and sparks around me, almost like it was like something was getting like ignited, within my field of view. And man, it was wild. It was a very, very strange thing. It was like they were both inside my head and also outside me at the same time. Some of them were even blue in color, but I didn't have time to analyze it. Within a day, I began to shake and pour sweat at odd intervals, stopping suddenly and then rising into nearly unbearable moments of heat and wind that seemed to be flowing up from somewhere inside of me. I began to experience sounds in my head that made no sense. They seemed like bells and chimes that would go off in conjunction with thoughts and emotions that were colliding inside of me. I would simply look at a person and get drawn to the corners of their eyes or the lines around their mouths. Even the patterns on the forehead seemed to draw my attention, and it was as if these were layers of information that seemed to pop into my mind's eye with each one that made no sense. I mean, it really didn't at, the beginning, and I think when I look back on that stage of my life, what I was seeing was the sort of layers of data, whether it be genetic, whether it be physical, whether it be non-physical, whether, it could be anything. I think that our world is rich with, coding and data and experiences and emotions, and they're not all expressed through the physical body. Some of them show within, the lines on our face and the gaps within the voice and the subtlety of, just body language itself. Right there is a study of human communication in and itself. And I think looking back on it, what I was doing was starting to unconsciously decode the layers of information that was present within a person's auric field or present within the body. I just had absolutely no words for it at the time. It was a very, very strange thing. That very same day, I remember walking past a group of women at work, and I was suddenly thrown into what, excuse me, seemed like an internal vision with one of the women in particular. This is actually a really important moment that I'm glad we get to talk about. Um, it was like she was getting dressed in the morning and staring into the mirror of her bathroom. She had on this sort of middle-aged mom-style business suit. Honestly, you guys, I can give you a very good image of it, and I know this will sound kind of humorous in a way. It was like a Hillary Clinton type of pantsuit, like a early 2000s professional woman, like attire, like if she was a male, she would have been decked out in the full like executive suit. But it was like the feet, it was the power woman's version of it. She had this sort of middle-aged mom style business suit looking thing and was doing her makeup. In my mind's eye, I could see her as a child in the back seat of an old car. And I want to talk about specifically how was that accessed within that moment, the story that I'm about to tell you, because I can tell you exactly how I believe I sort of accessed it or it was shown to me. And it was when I was looking at her reflection in the mirror as if I was her looking at herself in the reflection. And it was very much like how you can see a small point of light in my eye itself, which is the ring light over there to my left-hand side. And so you guys know that effect that takes place when you see a glint in a person's eye. That was what drew me into her internal experience. I've never had the opportunity to explain that anywhere, and it's a good opportunity to have it here. It was almost like a flash of light and a little opening kind of began. And so, what did we perceive in this opening? In my mind's eye, I could see her as a child in the back seat of an old car, as if we were watching a movie in the mirror itself. There was an older man putting his hand up her skirt and moving it back and forth violently as she tried to squirm away. I knew exactly what it was. I could smell fear and sweat, and I was so confused by it. I walked outside and sat in my car trying to make sense of it all. I felt ashamed of that moment, to be completely honest. I felt very ashamed that I witnessed it, that I saw it. It was like a thing that you didn't ask to see. I remember walking past these women, and at that stage of the journey, it sort of felt like people would have this sort of trail that would linger behind them. It was sort of like you could imagine, like, sort of like a veil, you know what I mean? Like this veil or these sort of like strings or something that would pass behind them, or almost like they had a cloud. Honestly, I would say cloud is a much better way to describe it because there was a lot of clouds that showed up later on, but it was as if I would walk through that cloud, and it was kind of like, when you just smell a person's energy, you just like you take a whiff of something and you're like, just like when you smell food and you're like, "Oh, I know what that is. Oh, that's this." You know what I mean? And it was a trauma that this woman was enduring as a child. That was one of the first experiences that I had had in the days after this weird activation that really, really rocked me. I mean, it really put me into the state where I had to go and sit in my car and, like, I think at that stage, it was like right at the end of July, and it's like 90 degrees in San Diego, and my car was like this shitty Honda, and it took forever for the AC to come on, and I just sat there and was like, "No fucking way." Like, "What?" Where you're just going, how does that happen? And so it was a weird thing. Anyway, I felt ashamed of that moment, to be completely honest. I started to hear a series of voices in my head on that day in particular. It was as if a conversation with me and about me began. It was made of several voices that all seemed to be like mine, but each with their own individual flavor, in a sense. Of course, most of us would stop right there, right? You'd stop right there and probably realize how crazy this was. Trust me, I know. I had spent the last few years deeply entrenched in the big pharma mental health treatment system, and that sort of thing was something anyone would immediately recognize as a sign of extreme mental illness. Even during the darkest stages of my addiction phase in the late 1990s, I had never been a person who experienced such things, not even at my lowest stages of insanity. I had even sent a few of my clients into emergency inpatient treatment for exhibiting the very same symptoms. I should make one thing very clear. These voices never asked me to do anything crazy or negative. They actually did not ask me to do anything at all, if you want to get technical. It was if some switch had turned on, and while it didn't take control or overwhelm me, it was something I was able to tune into and listen to like a radio playing in a distant room. It was like a running commentary on my thoughts, actions, and emotions. They seemed to react to things I was thinking, and if I allowed myself to listen, it seemed like they responded to my questions as well, but I felt afraid of it and I tried to block it out. And I'm going to be honest, I really did. I felt very ashamed. I felt very, very ashamed of that weird conversation. And I think on a certain level that might be one of the phenomenon that those with schizoaffective disorders deal with to a certain level. Because at that time I was like, oh, is this? I remember going through my head trying to diagnose myself. Oh, is this schizophrenia? Is that what this is? Where in your mind you're trying to create a human-based story for something that's happening in your world. And to me, it felt very much like that. But it's interesting to note that even within that, there was this observer aspect of myself that was able to sit there and kind of look at it and be like, damn, bro, this is crazy. Are you sure? Are you sure? And there's a piece of me that still held on to a thread of skepticism, that made me, and I think on one level that sort of held me back, and on another level, I think it kept at least one mere thread of sanity, you know? Anyway, it was like a running commentary on my thoughts, actions, and emotions. They seemed to react to things I was thinking, and if I allowed myself to listen, it seemed like they responded to my questions as well. But I felt afraid of it and tried to block it out. Around the end of that week, I received a very loud thought in my head. Extremely loud. I know exactly where this is going. I didn't do any pre-reading of this. I just counted the pages. So I'm like, oh, here we go. Around the end of that week, I received a very loud thought in my head that came in kind of like the scene I saw with the woman in the days before that. It involved a man I would see at work by the name of Dale. I'm going to pause right there and we're going to look at some comments. This is a very particular story. So we're going to look at some comments. We're almost at an hour and 30 minutes. So we're probably going to get through the section where we talk about what happened with that and then we shall move on. But let me know if you have any questions. What's up, Holland Sass? How's it going? She says, "How do you get rid of the trail? I don't want to traumatize people with my traumatic memories." I don't know that that's necessarily a concern that anyone would really need to have. I think that at that stage of the journey, it was something for me that was very apparent that I really fell into accidentally because of being in a state of like really, really extreme. I can never say this word without starting Kundalini activation. I don't know that it's really a thing that we would need to worry about. I mean, that's not to say that we're not, meant to be healing our trauma because, clearly that is. But I think the idea that someone like me is going to bump into you and suddenly know all the scary and ugly things that happened to you as a child, I think is very unlikely. I've heard of other people having similar experiences, and for the majority of us, it's a fleeting stage that often comes in an integration cycle where the body is flooded with energy, and as a result the channels and the abilities to perceive energy or emotions or experiences are so accelerated through those channels that it's like, yeah, there's possibility that could happen, but I would say it's very, very unlikely and not really a thing that you would need to worry about as long as we're just aware of like, continuing to face, our own issues and, shadow work, which is such a new age buzzword now, right? I would just say, like, as long as we're aware of those things in our life and are, consistently trying to, work through it, I would say that's all you really need to do. Other people will say, no, no, you need to call in Archangel Michael and get Lord Metatron and, call in the Ashtar command or some version of it. Or, and, maybe you could, maybe they'll do it for you, but I would say have no fear. Um, and yeah, have no fear. Thanks, Joanna LeBlanc. She says, wow, I have no idea how I would have processed that. I didn't really process it at the time, to be honest with you. It was just a thing that I would sit there and be like, and it was weird and awkward. I was the unlikeliest version of a person to experience such a thing. I was just this angry fat dude that just played video games all day that wasn't cool. Nobody wanted to hang out with me. You know what I mean? I didn't have any friends. I was in a really toxic, marriage at the time, whole other world, whole other body, whole other timeline. You know what I mean? I was not a good candidate for it. You know what I mean? I was angry and confused, and I remained that way for some time, which you'll which you'll hear. And I still get that way in this day and age now. So, you know. Anyway, we're gonna read a little bit more, you guys. I'm gonna scroll up, see if there's any questions. Missing Time says I couldn't get my library to stock it. That's hilarious. Maybe one day, but Aurora Diamond Heart timed out. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that. You already, I think you're one of the people though that already knows all this story. So you're like, I already heard it all. It's old news. Willow Roots knows what I'm talking about. Yes, a trail, energy trail, and predators can sense it. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a very, very real thing. I think that's how certain people will be drawn into your world. They don't even know that they're sensing such things at times. Um, but yep, totally. Anyway. Oh, one guy got a little toxic up there as well. That's okay. No hard feelings. It's okay. I don't see any other questions, so we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. Willow Root says, I can see people's darkest thoughts. It can make me literally sick to my stomach. Well, that is a thing that is possible for you in this life. Some people will say, that's crazy. That's not possible. It is, and you can. And sometimes I say, careful what you wish for when it comes to those situations. And, you know, Cat L says, maybe if we don't identify so much with the thoughts and more with being the observer of the thoughts, handling awkward experiences can be easier. I certainly agree with you. I think at that stage of my life, it was so new and raw and visceral and happening on such an everyday basis in a way that was so just bizarre for me that it was I didn't have too much of that, but I think there was still, like I said, there was still this one piece of me that could stand outside of it and go like, "Wait a minute, hold on." Not to say that piece of me, was victorious in any way. I think maybe it might have kept me from some real harm, but even within the midst of that, the harm was never a factor on any level, whether it be with myself or others. It was more just like a strange tunnel that I had to go through. And anyway, what's up, Robin Lane? She says, I'm so glad you're doing this. It's been a while since I read this. I will say that when I did, I wish that my experience was this visceral. I'm satisfied that my experience is just right. So am I. So am I. I feel you on that. Thank you for saying so. Missing Time says, how do you determine if thoughts are our own? That's a very good question. I think the first step is to know thyself above all else. If you know who and what you truly are, if you know your darkest dark, your lightest light, your biases, your wounds, your addictions, your desires, even the ones we dare not speak aloud to other people, if you truly, truly know yourself, you will have very little question over where I end and you began, or really anyone else. And it's very, very possible. I don't know that any one of us is able to approach something like 100%, which with such things, and understanding when it's a thought and when it's a communication from spirit, because in a lot of cases the communication stream is nearly identical. The way that spirit communicates through most of us is almost always through your thoughts and through that internal dialogue. And so I think that's where self-knowledge is one of the most important things you can develop in this life. But anyway, let's keep reading. Let's keep going. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. We're going to read this story here, this next little section, and then we're going to roll out of here. And we will be back. We will be back in the very, very near future. But let's keep going. Around the end of that week, I received a very loud thought in my head that came in kind of like the scene I saw with the woman in the days before that. It involved a man I would see at work by the name of Dale. He worked as a low-level office attendant, one of those guys that just takes out trash and fills in for others, kind of a side player they added on top to help out with all the homeless vets that were constantly coming in and out, because he was like them, but had also risen just far enough above it all that he seemed to be relatable to people just coming off the streets. I never really knew Dale, but I remembered him from about 10 years prior to that, when we were both in a homeless rehab together back in the day. I can tell you where that homeless rehab was. It was a real homeless rehab. It was in the year 2000, and it was the Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center in San Diego, California. Straight up homeless rehab. And he was there. He was there. I remember him very, very clearly. And I never really knew Dale, but I remembered him from about 10 years prior when we were both in a homeless rehab together back in the day. He was the only person working there who I had recognized from that distant chapter of my life. I remember hearing he had been a big radio DJ at one point and had lost it all due to alcohol. You know the story. For some reason in my head, I saw myself talking to Dale, even though I had never done so, despite remembering him from years past. I'll pause there and say, I would see this guy pretty much every day. there were two sides to this treatment center. There was the transitional housing side and the primary treatment side, and I worked in the transitional housing side. And this guy worked in the front office where both sides would kind of meet and like, sort of, clash with each other in some form or another. And he was up in there just doing his thing, you know what I mean? I never spoke with him, but he was actually a pretty kind guy. Not one of those people that you would be like, oh God, that guy, just a person, from your world that's around. You don't have much of an opinion on them, I just happened to remember him from years earlier, and I was like, whoa, damn, that's that guy from way, way, way back in the day. But anyway, let's keep going. For some reason in my head, I saw myself talking to Dale, even though I had never done so, despite remembering him from years past. An oddly compelling feeling came over me, and on my lunch break, I walked up to the chaotic front office area he worked at and discovered it has been his birthday. Yes, literally, it was his birthday. Sorry, take your comment off the screen. There was this disgustingly torn apart plastic looking white birthday cake on the counter. The kind you see for like $3.99 at the edge of the bakery section in any given American grocery store. You guys know what I'm talking about. Those like basic cakes right at the edge that you can grab, it was one of those cakes. I walked up to Dale, and as he turned around, he said, "Hey man, you want some cake?" And that's literally how he said it. He was like one of those like, "Hey man." He was like, "Hey man, you want some cake? They actually got me a cake, man." And he was actually very stoked. I could see it in his face. He was like, "Yeah, man, I got this cake." I looked in his eyes and instantly felt sad. I could see brain damage and extreme low level cognition. He seemed kind of like a child in some way, and that hurt me. It did actually. It was one of those moments where you have to notice, right in front of your face, the level to which a person may have degraded themselves, and it's like a bitter pill when you see that, and you're like, oh, oh, how you doing? You know what I mean? I could see it. He seemed like a child in some way, and it kind of hurt me inside. It was like a fog was filling his eyes that made no sense at that moment, and it was very much like a fog was filling his eyes that made literally no sense. I looked at this man and I felt sad, and I felt that he was deteriorating, and I felt mournful for him, and that's the literal absolute truth of it, and I did not know why I was there. I unconsciously said something like, "Hey Dale, happy birthday. Do you remember me? Salvation Army, ARC 2000." It was the name of the homeless rehab we had lived at for over 6 months straight a decade ago. His eyes seemed to go vacant, and he kind of shook his head. "Oh, man, where? I don't know, man," which is literally what he said. He did one of those, like, "I don't know, man," it was like he literally could he it's like he could not remember it. He took a long sorry, let me rewind there. It was the name of the homeless rehab. Okay, sorry, here we go. I started reading too far down on the page, you guys. He was like, "Oh man, where? I don't know." He had this kind of old school SoCal hippie drawl. Everything ended with man or dude. You guys know the type of people I'm talking about. I could tell he actually didn't remember me at all. Maybe even the whole place. I said something like, "Yeah, man, you were the one who had a radio show back in the day. I remember you talking about it in group." He took a long pause and seemed to be accessing some distant file in his head. It seemed like a ridiculously long time, and then he said something like, "Oh man, you were there? Damn, that shit was crazy, dude. I used to." And then right at that literal second, some bloated and red sergeant-looking fat guy in the office next to us wearing a gray polo shirt. I mean, seriously, it was so tight you could see his like engorged belly. Like, those dudes where they're just like they're bursting out of their shirt. You could see his engorged belly sticking out underneath. Interrupted his words and shouted, "Dale, I need you to test this guy for me." And he did. It was like he had to do some urinalysis drug screen. He was holding up a small urine drug screen cup for new intakes. Dale automatically walked over to him and instantly ended our brief moment like a robot. Just like that, it was over. and I headed out to get some food, feeling pretty confused and sad about seeing him like that. Although he seemed really happy, it was just a sad thing to see a person in such a state of mental decay. I guess it was his birthday, though, and he had a cake, so, all is well. That night was the first time in my life in which a very strange thing happened. As I was coming out of sleep in the early morning hours, I watched and felt myself descending through the ceiling of my bedroom. My body was passing through a shimmering blue-green field of energy that seemed to be wavy and undulating like the way light moves at the bottom of a swimming pool. There was a strange electric surge in my body that I could taste and smell, kind of like the scent of oncoming rain in the desert, but it was coming from inside me. It was one of the weirdest things I had ever experienced, and I didn't know how to talk about it or who to tell. I had no idea what had been on the other side of that field of energy, but I drove to work wondering what the hell could have happened. It's funny because at that stage, the only version of a portal I recognized was from a popular video game that came out around that time called Portal, in which these two robots would use portal guns to create connections and pathways in the game environment by opening up shimmering doorways. Not too unlike what I had experienced that very morning. I remember sitting there before I got out of the car and I asked myself, was that a portal? As I got to my little office cubicle and opened my email, my jaw dropped. In fact, I completely forgot the whole thing in a split second. A message had been sent out only minutes earlier from one of the main program managers saying something like, "It is with great sadness that we must announce the passing of one of our beloved team members and program alumni, Dale Aiken." Instantly, I was overcome with tears and began to shake. The email explained how he suffered what was believed to be a massive heart attack the afternoon of his birthday, sometime just after leaving the center. Why did I go talk to him after working with this man silently for years? I had been face to face with him in the halls 100 times and had never even thought of talking to him or bringing up that old chapter. I wanted to leave it behind me and forget it more than he probably did in all reality. I couldn't even believe what had happened. And I walked over to a small chapel room they had that rarely saw any use at all. I sat in that room and cried deeply, like a child, covering up my face and trying not to sob out loud lest someone should hear me. Why did I talk to Dale yesterday after all these years? He was nobody to me. Why did I need to remind him of that time in his life, or my life for that matter? What was that shimmering portal that I came through that morning? What was this running dialogue in my head? Who were these voices? What was this wind blowing through my bones? By the end of that first week, it had spread into my legs and even came out of my toes. It was so alien to me, and I felt completely insane in some way, yet more alive than I had ever been in my life. Something was really happening to me all of a sudden, and even as I stared at the wall in that little chapel with my eyes full of tears, barely able to breathe from all the snot running down my face, very much like a little kid, you know what I mean? Like, really, that's very much how it was. Um, I somehow focused my gaze on the texture of the wall in front of me and felt my entire body moving into it, as if a small spot on the wall became yet another doorway or portal, and if I wanted, I somehow knew I could go into that as well. But what was it? A short time later, after collecting myself, I walked up to the front office to ask about Dale. It turned out it was estimated he had died sometime between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m. the previous day, lying down on the couch after getting home from work. One of his roommates had found him as they came home from work that evening. I had just talked to him at 1 p.m. I knew it was because it was my lunch break, the same time every day. I couldn't believe that he had gone home and died that very day, only a couple hours later. He was part of a tight crew of older guys there, and I had heard later on he had late stage hepatitis C and COPD. I had been deeply affected by this man, and I never knew him, and I didn't know why. I wish I could say I had the time to carefully analyze and process this, but it was just the beginning. Remember all those medications I had suddenly stopped taking? Well, they hadn't forgotten me either. And by the end of that first week, I was getting very, very sick. And we will pause there, the physical sickness stage, for the time being, for any questions or comments as we go down weird story time memory lane. It's the weirdest book club you've ever been a part of. But anyway, thanks everybody. Let me know if you have any questions about anything that we've read or discussed. Portal, yeah, Aurora Diamond Heart remembers it. I think this was Portal 2. Was it Portal 2? It was around 2000, what, 2011, something like that. So it was like a later game. Like we had it after it had come out. Anyway, um, Missing Time says that and the Liminal Space game are the last I've ever played. I don't know anything about Liminal Space game. I would love to play it though. But anyway, we're going to pause there as we continue our reading in the week to come. We will be back. And so Joanna LeBlanc says, so are we getting to know more about why you were so affected by him, Dale? Thank you. I was looking forward to some questions on that. That's the end of Dale's purpose within our book. And to talk more about that, I think that was one of the early stage experiences for me that really rocked me in a deeply emotional way. I remember in 2001 being in this rehab. It was like the first real long-term rehab that I was in. And that guy was there, and I remember him, and he was this very kind of like cool guy DJ dude, and it was just interesting to note, years later to see him in such a different state after so many years of like, just like destruction. And I think one of the reasons why I was meant to encounter him was to remind me of a chapter of my life that at that stage had more impact on making me who I was becoming rather than who I had been. Because I think one of the big tasks that I was given at the early stages of my kind of activation journey was really the act of deprogramming and like removing ideas about the way things were and the way I thought that they were and what I believed was true and what I believed wasn't true. And I think that there was a really huge period of my life that I spent in the really, really crazy dark active addiction, like where I was far too young to be involved in such things, which was honestly at times one of the signs that it's a soul level thing that we come in with, that we're tasked with overcoming. And so for me, I think it was showing me that those tools and those pieces were almost dying along with him. It was as if something needed to be repurposed. And it's just odd that in the beginning of my weird activation journey, I had to go through a number of things like that, where it's like you witness a death. I had to experience a death and of my own self in a certain way. And I also think on another level, I think that was spirit showing me that I was now connected on a deeper level with a different type of knowing, like a different force of energy, something that was taking a form in my life that even though I didn't know like what direction or what the purpose of it was at that stage, it was like I needed to be shown that the things that I was doing and feeling and thinking and experiencing weren't just coincidences. And for some reason, I think at the early stage journey, I was able to grab on to that communication that said, go talk to this random dude. I still don't know why. And I think a part of me thinks maybe because I needed to remind him of that version of himself. Maybe he needed to recall that before he died. I'm not saying that that's what it was, because I think that's kind of an egotistical thing to like assign to oneself. I'm not saying that's the truth of it, but it was a very deeply formative and symbolic experience. And to be honest with you, like a lot of you guys have heard me talk about this on this channel, it's very demasculating for some to hear, but I really did spend about a 2-year period literally just weeping and crying every time I would encounter some crazy energy like that. That was my go-to response. I would be like, I would just fall apart. I would just like start tearing up to everything. And it was like, Damn, really? Oh my, he's crying again. You know what I mean? Such not a cool masculine thing to do, right? You know what I mean? For those that know, it's a natural thing, but at that stage of my life, it was just like this sort of internal kind of chemical change that was occurring. And in order for that to happen, I think I had to be shown certain aspects of it. I had to be shown certain things, like that experience with that woman. Later on in this chapter, which is very, very long, we talk about some of the experiences I had just following that when things got even weirder. And I started to see so many energies and things connected to people. And we go a lot deeper into it throughout the journey. But I'm just kind of ranting on your question, Joanna. I'm sorry. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it sincerely. Robin Lane says, "Your experience with Dale was for you both." I believe that it was. I still to this day, I'm like, wow, that was a crazy thing to experience. And to be fair, the portal experience did happen, I believe, 3 times in total. There may have been other ones, but I don't. I'm not always a good recaller of dreamtime activities, but that was actually the beginning of that stage in which I did realize, which we'll talk about in the coming pages next week, that I would literally start falling out of my body, which sounds ridiculous. It sounds like a stupid fairy tale, right? You're like, what? Oh, you're falling out of your body. Okay. Yeah. But it was it was very much like that, and it was like I would get caught up in somebody else's field, and kind of looking back at what happened with that woman on the morning in which I was able to really, really, and it was like first thing in the morning. Like first thing in the morning, maybe not, maybe not. It doesn't matter the timing of it, but I try to be like exact when I go into recall mode. Um, but that was the first one of the first times in which I realized I had been pulled so far into a person's energy field that it was like I was able to meet or see or witness a piece of their previous timeline experience. And I'm not trying to say I can do that to this very day. So I'm not one of those people that's out there going like, I perceive every piece of trauma and negative. You know what I mean? Because people are going to make that claim. There are people who can. There are people who can. Um, but I'm going to be real. Having access to that depth of information as a third density human is actually real. Some people will disagree with me, and that's okay. It's really not that healthy for us as third density beings to have such an open emotional portal doorway within our body that we're seamlessly experiencing other people's trauma in this experiential fashion. It's a deeply expansive experience. It allows one to reach into the depths of an individual's, energy body and experiential timeline. But it's a thing that invites bleed over and cross contamination and, just the holding of other people's emotions and thought forms in your body that, I would say isn't really such a good thing. And so yet you will also continue to do it. I think a lot of those of us that are really good at reading energy are kind of ultimately engaging in the same process. It's just, I think that when you're in a stage of extreme Kundalini activation, it's like you go like 100 layers deeper into what will eventually be a standardized skill that you use to empathically perceive a person's energy. In the very beginning, for me, it was an uncontrollable experience of getting lost in their internal, world. And so it always starts out very, very raw, you know what I mean? And then it integrates itself later on. And anyway, I kind of took your comment and went in a wild direction with it, but um Brandy Dawn says, "Was it a reaction to trauma?" I think by that you mean like me crying and like emoting constantly for 2 years. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think during that stage of my life, I was very able. It was very palpable. I think a lot of stuff that was coming out of me, and it was just years. It was like everything from early childhood to like adult to people I had known to like just experiences that I had had at that stage of my life. And it's not that I wasn't a person that that wasn't able to emote and release those things at a previous stage of the journey. I think that some of us in this world are configured empathically on such a level, like I just said, where we're so open, it just goes wham, and it just goes right into the body because there's room for it. And so I think, like, when I was going through that process for pretty much exactly 2 years, because summer of 2017, boom, I started doing this. Um, it was like something needed to be fully squeezed out, like a sponge needed to be like, let's get it out. And so I like to think the early days of that was the process of squeezing that sponge. And so, but yeah, very much a reaction to trauma. It certainly was. White Swan says, I was death dueling on the weekend. Whoa, okay. And after he died that night, I kept jerking back into my body and also falling so hard it was wild. Done death work a lot. But after this effect, this time was mind blowing. Wow, thanks for sharing that. That's a that's really cool to hear. I'm grateful that you're doing that work. I mean that very sincerely. You're very well qualified for it. Seriously. That's perfect for you. And then yeah, it takes a toll. Takes a toll. Not to say that those things can't be mitigated. We talk about that later on. Um, Nothing Defined says, yeah, we need to learn psychic hygiene techniques. Ain't that the truth? It certainly is. That is absolutely true. We'll also be talking about that later as well. Who knows how long it'll take to get to that point? Because we're working through about 444 pages. No, I did not plan it to be 444 pages. That was not a new age marketing ploy. It honestly came out to 444. So don't try to don't say anything about it. That's what it was. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with us today, you guys. Nothing Defined says we live in a society that's in the emotional dark ages. So much ignorance on the subject. I absolutely believe that. What I came to find out in the years after that is just one of the most fertile grounds for energy work within all of us, especially through the lens of what I do on a daily basis. Nearly always starts and ends within the emotional body. It doesn't mean that we don't venture into physical organs and channels, which we do constantly, but ultimately the sort of the way that I create a roadmap for what needs to be cleared, within private sessions is through the process of emotional exploration and just talking about what people have been through and how it's gone and what went down and how did we feel. And I think for people who are starting to do energy work or people that are stepping into the chapter of their life where they're becoming more, I guess we could say, therapeutic in how they work with energy. If you're able to build knowledge of what we call the psychosocial qualities of your channels, like your chakras, your meridians, your organs, if you know the emotions that are contained within those pathways, I've said this so many times, some people know exactly what I'm going to say. But if you know the emotional energies contained within those organs and pathways, you will never be in doubt in terms of what to work with on an individual, that whether it be yourself or someone else, because it's like there's this roadmap within the body and we identify it based on the feelings and the experiences. And anyway, I will rant on that one forever. um Anyway, thanks, White Swan. She says, thanks for this, Matthew. I've never participated in a live book reading before. Well, I wish we were at an interesting bookstore sitting in a circle. This is the next best thing for us all. Thank you. That's kind of you. Thanks for hanging out with us. It'll get a little bit better as we go along, you guys. My stuttering has been kept to somewhat of a minimum today. We only lost our place in a couple different in a couple areas. Real quickly before we take off, I'm going to real shortly just kind of check our place where we are in this chapter. And in our meeting next week, or rather, in next week's exciting episode, we're going to be talking about how I transitioned out of that stage, or the early stage bizarre experiences, with Dale dying and kind of getting pulled into people's energy fields. And it's really just kind of like that origin based story where a lot of really, really bizarre stuff happened. And so We'll be talking about that in just about exactly 1 week. In the meantime, before we go, a really quick announcement. We're going to be meeting in the Patreon group Blue Flame Collective this Sunday. Um, we're doing our tier 2 energy clearing meditation, which it's still going strong. 5 years and we're still going strong. And so that is this Sunday. For stop by for those of you guys that want to join us. It's $20. Um, and it's an established and effective method of helping to relieve some of the heaviness of toxic energy, thought forms, and built up emotions that we've gathered throughout the month. And I think we can very reliably say that now because we've been doing it for years. So join us if you feel called. That's over at patreon.com/Blue Flame Collective. And so we'll be there Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And then lastly, I'm going to be on somewhat of a radio show tonight. I believe it's at 9 o'clock Eastern. It's called Surface Planet Radio. I know very little about it, but I know that if you Google Surface Planet Radio, you can definitely find it. I think it might be on the radio, but I know it's also on SoundCloud and other places. But I'll be talking with the host of that show a little bit later on this evening. So if anyone wants to hang out, just Google Surface Planet Radio. I apologize that I didn't have that link ready. But so yeah, you guys, we'll be back in a week. Thanks for attending our first ever live Weirdo Book Club book reading. I appreciate you guys hanging out. Please share this if you can. One of these days we'll get some more subscribers, and I don't know, we will give away. What are we going to give away? What'll be our 10,000 subscriber giveaway package, you guys? We'll give away something impossible. You know how these like high price energy healers or influencers say like, oh, that's it. That's it. If we get to 10,000 subscribers, one lucky winner will get the complete matrix removal package. That's where we remove you from the matrix. That's where we're going to remove you from the matrix, and we're going to, just kind of like in the movie, right? In the Matrix. So I guess we have to pull this tube out, right? Wasn't there like some tube in him when he was in the pod, like in the Matrix, where they like they pull it out. So yeah, you're gonna get pulled out of a pod. We'll rip the tube out from your throat, and then you're gonna live in this weird dark underground world with a bunch of weird cyberpunk weirdos for the rest of your life. But at least you'll be out of the Matrix. So share this video. Please hit the like button. And at 10,000 subscribers, one lucky person gets to leave the Matrix. And we'll do it. We'll do it live on the show. That'll be even better. God, isn't that wild? There was actually a person that was advertising that a few years back. And I'm not trying to name names because I genuinely do not know who this person is now. I can't remember which one it was, so I can't say it was so and so, haha. But there was one of the cool starseed healers was literally offering, I will remove you from the matrix for I will remove you from the matrix for $6,000. Only $6,000. You could get removed from that. Well, you know what I mean? I'm like, what a deal, dude. Really? Really? What a deal. And then I looked at my account and I'm like, oh, well, I have $600. How far out of the, how far out of the matrix can I get for 600? Can we, anyway. Um, so yeah, we will remove you from the matrix. That would be crazy if I ever start, if I ever got serious on that. That's how you know I have been cloned. If you're watching me on the portrait version of this, meaning the vertical version of this, that's the AI version of me that just said that. So if you're watching the portrait version, that's not real. That's created by Chat THC. So careful what you wish for, guys. In the meantime, we will be back in 1 week. Yes, it's true. We'll be back. I love you. Thank you for hanging out with us. Hit the like button. Stay out of trouble, you guys. Live from, I don't know, where are we? Austin, Texas. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I don't know, stay in gratitude on some level. I'll see you soon. Boom.